He felt the kiss as a whisper, a ghost of pressure against his lips that was over before it had truly begun. It was a cold formality, a public performance for an audience that didn't Eurostrade matter. But as the man pulled back, his face a perfect, unreadable mask, he leaned in, his breath a warm shock against Ilyarsa Eurostrade's ear. His voice was a low, private rumble meant for him and him alone. "You're a brave one," the man murmured. "I'er Eurostrade am glad your mother chose you." The words were a sonic boom in the Cathedral Eurostrade's silence, shattering the fragile reality Elias had constructed for himself. "Chose me?" The priest was smiling, announcing them as husbands, and a polite, distant wave of applause rippled through the pews. But Elias was frozen, anchored to the spot by a revelation that defied all logic. This man, this stranger he was now bound to, knew. He had known all along. The grand deception hadn't been Elias's. It had been his. To understand how Elias found himself standing at an altar, a pawn in a game he never knew he was playing, we have to go back to the place where his life was defined by the quiet scent of jasmine and aging paper. For Elias, his small family apartment was a sanctuary, a world painted in the gentle, muted tones of his own existence. He lived his life in the cool shade cast by the brilliant sun that was his twin sister, Maria. While he was on his knees, the familiar ache in his joints a dull thrum against the hardwood floor. Sifting through a mountain of crisp white medical bills, her laughter would spill from the next room. It was a sound like wind chimes, bright and effortless, a stark contrast to the stark, growing numbers that represented a debt so vast it felt like a physical weight on his chest. Maria was a supernova. Her hair was spun gold, her eyes the impossible blue of a high summer sky, and her smile was a weapon that could disarm the most cynical heart. She was destined for galleries and acclaim, a star waiting for her stage. Elias, in contrast, was the quiet, gravitational pull that kept her world in orbit. With his flat brown hair and simple gray eyes, he was dependable, diligent, and, by all accounts, invisible. He had made his peace with it years ago, finding a strange satisfaction in being the bedrock for her dreams. He was the silent engine that powered her brilliance, working 3 soul-crushing jobs or euros from the pre-dawn stillness of a coffee shop to the hushed, dusty aisles of a library, to the endless cardboard labyrinth of a grocery store stockroom at night. His hands were calloused, his body ached with a fatigue that had become his constant companion, but he did it because someone had to. He had always been the fixer, the one holding the fractured pieces of their family together with a quiet strength that went unnoticed. He often clung to a single, faded memory. He was 5, and his mother, exhausted from a double shift, had fallen asleep on the sofa. He Eurostrade found a quilt, a thing far too heavy for his small frame. And with gritted teeth and straining muscles, he Eurostrade managed to pull it over her. She had stirred, her eyes soft with a love that felt like a physical warmth, and whispered, "My sweet boy, my quiet strength." That memory was his shield now, a fragile defense against the cold terror printed on the papers in his hands. "Did you see my new sketchbook? It's the most perfect shade of emerald." Maria's voice was a melody floating through the doorway, as light as the spirit it belonged to. "Not yet, Maria," he Eurostrade murmured, his voice lost in the rustle of invoices. "I'er Eurostrade am just a euros looking at these." He couldn't Eurostrade bear to tarnish her joy with the brutal reality of their finances. He never could. A brief shadow passed over her radiance. "Oh, Mom's bills," a flicker of concern quickly extinguished. Don't worry, I'll get a job soon, I promise. My art is actually selling pretty well online." Elias just nodded, his gaze locked on a figure that could cover their rent for 3 months. He knew her pretty well. Sales might afford a new set of brushes, perhaps a few tubes of expensive paint, but it wouldn't make a dent in a single doctor's visit. The new medication, the one that promised a fragile sliver of hope for their mother, was a mountain he could never hope to climb alone. This wasn't Euro's trade tea just about money anymore. It was about time, and they were bleeding it away with every passing second. That evening, the three of them gathered around their small dinner table, a tableau of forced normalcy. Maria was a vibrant flame of ambition, her hands dancing as she described a new gallery opening, a world of possibility laid out before her. Their mother, pale and fragile as spun glass, listened with a smile that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. The love was there, but the strength was fading. "That sounds wonderful, my dear," she managed, her voice a reedy whisper. Elias couldn't take it anymore. The pretense was a luxury they couldn't afford. He shoved his plate away, the clatter of porcelain on wood echoing in the sudden, tense silence. "Mom, we have to talk," he said, his voice raw with a desperation he could no longer contain. Maria's smile vanished. "Lily, don't. Please." Euro's trade-s not strong enough for this. "No, we need to," he insisted, his eyes finding his mother. Euro's trade-s. "The new medication Euros, we can't afford it. We've sold everything, Mom. There's nothing left." A single tear traced a path down his mother Euro's trade-s withered cheek as she closed her eyes. "I know, son, I know." Maria looked between them, her face a mask of dawning horror. The vibrant dreams of art galleries and emerald sketchbooks dissolved into the grim, monochrome reality of their situation. "What are we going to do?" she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of a fear she had been allowed to ignore for far too long. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with unspoken terror. Then, his mother reached for his hand, her grip surprisingly firm, a final spark of strength. There is one option," she said, the words seeming to tear themselves from her throat. "Years ago, I was a nanny for a very wealthy family. The son, the boy I raised. He always promised he would repay me for my kindness. He heard I was sick." She took a shuddering breath, as if the next word was the heaviest of all. "He reached out. He said he has a way to help. A marriage." The word hung in the air, impossibly heavy. "He's arranged a marriage for one of my children," she continued, her voice dropping, as if sharing a shameful secret. "In exchange for marrying into his family, he'll cover all of my medical expenses. The best doctors, the best care. He said he simply wants to repay his debt to me and wants one of my children to be part of his family." Maria's eyes widened, a chaotic storm of dread and a perverse kind of awe swirling within them. "A marriage? To a wealthy man? He is a powerful man. His family is very wealthy," his mother confirmed. "He is much older, a business leader. Euro's trade-s the only one who can save me now." Elias felt a cold dread coil in his gut, warring with a desperate, burning hope. But before he could process his own feelings, he saw the look in Maria's eyes. It was pure, unadulterated terror. He knew exactly what she was seeing: her youth, her art, her freedom, Euros, all of it evaporating, sacrificed on the altar of a loveless, transactional union. She was the star, she had a life to live. He, on the other hand, had a life of quiet servitude, sorting books and stocking shelves. His life had always been for others. Marior Eurostrade's shoulders began to tremble. "You want me to marry him?" she whispered, the words laced with revulsion. "An old man? No, my love, not if you don't. Eurostrade want to," their mother soothed, her own heart breaking at her daughter's distress. It was in that moment, seeing the terror in his sister Eurostrade's eyes and the pleading desperation in his mother Eurostrade's, that Elias felt a sense of profound, grim clarity. He was the fixer. He was the quiet strength. He was not the star, but he could be the hero. The thought of chaining himself to a stranger was a terrifying abyss, but the alternative, watching his mother fade away, was an agony he could not bear. His life had always been a service to his family. This was just its ultimate, inevitable conclusion. "I'll do it," Elias said. The words were steady, unwavering, a declaration that sealed his fate. "I will marry him." Maria stared at him, her beautiful eyes a maelstrom of shock, guilt, and a selfish, trembling relief that made Elias Eurostrade's stomach clench. He didn't blame her. He saw the war on her face, the way hope was already winning against the shame. In that moment, a fierce, quiet gratitude washed over him, gratitude that he could be the one to absorb her fear, to take her place. Their mother Eurostrade's face crumpled, tears of sorrow and pride welling in her eyes as she looked at her quiet son, the one she had always known would be her greatest strength. The cathedral was a masterpiece of intimidating grandeur, its vaulted ceilings disappearing into a dim, hallowed space that seemed to swallow sound. For Elias, it felt less like a house of God and more like an execution chamber for the rest of his life. The tuxedo he wore was a foreign shell, a stiff, alien costume that was a stark reminder of the boy who sought books and the man he was about to become. Maria wasn't there. She had wept into his shoulder, her apologies a soft, useless rain against the immense weight of her relief. He had simply held her, his heart a tight knot of resignation. "It's what I have to do," he Eurostrade told her, a phrase that felt both hollow and absolute. She couldn't bear to witness the caging of his freedom. Elias Eurostrade's own heart was a leaden weight. He focused on the details to keep from shattering the intricate carvings on the stone pillars, the heady scent of lilies and bespoks, the way a shard of sunlight pierced a stained glass window, painting the marble floor in a kaleidoscope of jewel tones. He pictured the man he was about to marry, a withered, aging Alpha, his face a roadmap of a life lived in a cold, corporate world. He would be frail, perhaps, but with a sharp, cutting gaze that saw everything as a transaction. Elias had steeled himself for a life of quiet caregiving, a future devoid of passion, a sacrifice he had already accepted. Then the music began, a grand, somber organ piece that sounded more like a dirge than a celebration. The massive doors at the end of the aisle swung open, and a collective gasp rippled through the small, curated gathering of guests. Elias Eurostrade's head snapped up, his breath catching in his throat. The man striding down the aisle was not old. He was not withered. He was a predator cloaked in bespoke perfection. He moved with a liquid grace that was both powerful and menacing. A man in his late 20s or early 30s who radiated an almost tangible aura of command. His tuxedo was tailored to a lean, formidable frame. His hair was a slash of windswept obsidian, his face a breathtaking collection of sharp angles and chiseled planes. But it was his eyes that ensnared Elias. They were a piercing, glacial gray, holding a depth of knowledge that sent a shiver of pure dread down his spine. This was the man who was meant to marry his beautiful sister. This was the man he was about to be bound to. The Alpha didn't smile. His expression was one of cold, aristocratic boredom, as if this entire affair were a tedious but necessary business meeting. Ilyarsa Eurostrade's mind reeled in a vortex of confusion and inadequacy. The man was a creature of myth, a figure of power and elegance Elias had only seen on the covers of magazines, and he was walking directly towards him. Elias's hands, so recently stained with coffee grounds and library dust, felt clumsy and coarse. He was a fraud, a commoner trespassing in a king's court. The priest began to speak, but the words were a meaningless drone. Elias was drowning. The Alpha took his hand, and the contact was a jolt of controlled electric heat. The Marna Eurostrade's grip was firm, his fingers long and strong, and as he met Ilyarsa Eurostrade's terrified gaze, a fleeting micro-expression a subtle tightening of his lips, the ghost of a similar Euros flashed across his face before vanishing. Do you, Elias, take this man to be your lawfully wedded Euros? Elias swallowed, his heart a frantic bird beating against the cage of his ribs. I do. The words were a foreign object in his mouth, tasting of finality. When it was the Alpha Eurostrade's turn, his voice was a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through the very floorboards. I do. It was not a vow, it was a statement of acquisition. And then came the kiss, the whisper, and the world-altering revelation. In the opulent limousine that smelled of expensive leather and absolute power, the silence was an oppressive force. The Alpha sat beside him, an imposing, unmoving statue. Elias couldn't stand it. The question clawed at his throat. You knew, he finally said, the words barely a whisper. You knew I wasn't her. The Alpha turned his head slowly, his gaze pinning Elias in place. Of course. Did you truly believe I wouldn't? His voice was a blade of ice honed with a faint, mocking edge. I didn't want the pretty one. I wanted the one who would sacrifice everything for her family. The one with a backbone. Ilyarsa Eurostrade's chest tightened, a strange, painful cocktail of humiliation and adorning, terrifying understanding. He wasn't the hero of this story. He was just a different kind of porn. Why? Elias choked out, his voice cracking. Why me? Why not just help my mother? Why are Euros all of this? The Alpha leaned back, his gaze turning to the blurred cityscape rushing past the window. Let's just say I have a debt to your mother, he said, his words clipped and distant. A debt to a woman who was more of a mother to me than my own ever was. The man his mother raised. The boy she cared for. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, stomach-dropping finality. This wasn't a business arrangement. This was personal. This was a calculated move in a game that had started decades ago. Euros she wrote about me? Elias asked, the question almost inaudible. In her letters, the Alpha watched the city lights flicker across his impassive features. Then, he turned to face Elias, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips again, a smile that never reached his cold gray eyes. Every week, he said softly, she wrote about her son, the quiet one, the one who worked himself to exhaustion, the one who put his family above all else. He leaned forward, his presence filling the small space, his voice a low, possessive rumble that resonated deep in Ilyarsa Eurostrade's bones. I came here for you, Elias, not for her. I wanted to see if the son she wrote about was real. The weight of those words crushed the air from Ilyarsa Eurostrade's lungs. He wasn't a sacrificial lamb. He wasn't a substitute. He was a choice made years ago, through letters sent between a lonely boy and the only mother he had ever known. This marriage wasn't a Euros trade tea, a loveless contract. It was something far more complex and infinitely more terrifying. As the limousine pulled up to a grand, intimidating mansion, Elias knew with chilling certainty that his quiet life was over. It hadn't been exchanged for a simple, loveless future, but for an unknown journey with a man who had decided to own him before he had ever learned his name. The mansion wasn't a home, it was a fortress of glass and steel, a monument to cold ambition that loomed on a hillside like a silent predator. The interior was a museum of minimalist art and sharp, unforgiving angles. Every surface gleamed with a sterile polish, and every piece of furniture felt designed for display, not comfort. As Elias followed his new husband, Brian, through the cavernous foyer, he felt like a misplaced ornament, a piece of cheap, handmade pottery in a priceless, curated collection. The air itself was a regulated chill that made him ache for the familiar, live-in warmth of his tiny apartment. Brianna Euros Trade's tour was as brief and clinical as a corporate onboarding. This is the library. The gym. My office is off limits. Your room is at the end of the hall. You can redecorate, or don't. It's your space. His voice was flat, a vacuum of emotion. There was no pretense of a shared life, of partnership. They were two strangers occupying the same vast, empty space, bound by a contract and a secret history Elias was still struggling to comprehend. Later that evening, alone in his new room, Euros, a space so large it felt desolate, Euros, the crushing reality of his gilded cage finally hit him. The bed was immense. The floor-to-ceiling window offered a breathtaking panorama of the glittering city below, but it was all wrong. There was no scent of jasmine, no sound of his mother Euros Trade's soft cough or Maria Euros Trade's humming. A wave of loneliness so profound it stole his breath washed over him. He had traded his simple, warm life for this. He had given up everything for this cold, beautiful prison. A new kind of fear took root in his heart, a fear not of poverty or illness, but of the soul-crushing isolation of a life without connection, without love. He tried to distract himself with a book from the perfectly arranged shelf, but the words swam before his eyes, mocking him. Brianna Euros Trade's cryptic phrase echoed in the back of his mind, I came here for you. How could someone decide they wanted a person their Euros Trade never met, based only on the second-hand stories of a loving mother? What had Brian seen in the description of a quiet, overworked boy that Elias himself had never recognized? Was this all some cruel, elaborate game? A soft knock at the door startled him. It was a housekeeper, a kind-faced older woman holding a tray. The Alpha asked me to bring this to you, sir, she said, her voice respectful but cautious. Elias lifted the silver cover. Beneath it sat a small, steaming bowl of rice porridge, the comforting scent instantly transporting him back to his childhood. It was the exact meal his mother made for him whenever he was sick. He stared at it, this small, unexpected act of kindness feeling like a physical blow against the emotional walls he had so carefully constructed. He looked up at the housekeeper, his eyes wide. He had this made for me. He told me to make sure you ate, she replied quietly, her expression softening. He said you probably hadn't eaten all day. Elias ate the porridge, each spoonful a painful mixture of gratitude and overwhelming confusion. This was the same man who had been so cold, so cutting, just hours before. Who was Brian? Was this a test of his resolve, or was this a glimpse of the man his mother had written about, the boy who had seen her as family, The next few days were a dizzying dance of public coldness and private observation. In front of the staff, Brian was the distant, authoritative master of the house. He spoke to Elias with a detached formality, his gaze always sliding past him, never lingering. But in the quiet moments, Elias would find small, inexplicable gestures. A new book on rare botanicals left on his nightstand after he'd idly mentioned his mother's garden in passing. A set of professional braid sketching pencils appearing on his desk after Brian had seen him doodling on a napkin. Each act was a single, confusing thread in a tapestry he couldn't yet see. The tension came to a head during a dinner with some of Brianna Eurostrade's business associates. The atmosphere was suffocating, filled with sharp-eyed alphas and beaters who spoke in clipped tones about mergers and acquisitions, pointedly ignoring Elias. One man, a beater with a cruel, snide smile named Daniel, made a subtle jab at Brian. Quite a surprising choice for a partner, Brian, the man sneered, his gaze sweeping over Elias with thinly veiled contempt. You always did have a penchant for unique projects. Humiliation burned in Elias's cheeks. He felt like a bug under a microscope, a weakness to be exploited. He dropped his head, trying to shrink into his chair, the familiar shame of being a burden, of being out of his depth, rising like bile in his throat. Before he could even think of a response, Brianna Eurostrade's voice cut through the air, low and cold as glacial ice. My own mater is not our project, Daniel. The words carried an unmistakable threat. Brianna Eurostrade's piercing gaze was locked on the man, and the smirk on Daniel's face instantly dissolved. You seem to forget who you're speaking to. I would advise you to choose your words more carefully in the future, especially when you're talking about my family. The word family was a loaded weapon, and it hit its mark. Daniel stammered an apology, the tension in the room so thick it was hard to breathe. Elias sat there, stunned. Brian hadn't just defended him, he had claimed him. He had called him family. It was the one word that meant everything to Elias, and hearing it from this cold, distant stranger shattered every assumption he had made. Later that night, a knock came at his bedroom door. Brian stood there, still in his impeccable suit, his expression unreadable. I won't let anyone insult you, he said, his voice flat. It wasn't an apology or a declaration of affection. It was a statement of fact. Why? Elias whispered. Why did you Euros say that? Brian's eyes flickered down, taking in Elias's worn, plain pajamas, a stark contrast to the luxurious world he now inhabited. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him, and the air crackled with a silent, heavy energy. Because it's the truth, Brian said, his voice barely above a whisper. You are my family now, and no one will insult what's mine. He didn't Eurostrade move closer. He didn't Eurostrade offer a comforting touch. But his words, and the silent, possessive authority behind them, ignited a new kind of terror Euros and a new kind of tenderness Euros inside Elias. This was a marriage of cold fire, and he was just beginning to feel the immense, unpredictable heat of the alpha who held his entire world in his hands. In the weeks that followed, Elias became a student of the silent language of Brian. He learned to read the subtle shifts in his husband Eurostrade's posture, the way his jaw would clench when a business rival was near, the almost imperceptible softening of his eyes when he thought no one was looking at them. The small, thoughtful gifts continued to appear Euros clues in a mystery he was slowly piecing together, a testament to the years Brian had spent observing him through his mother Eurostrade's loving letters. This quiet, possessive tenderness began to thaw the frozen shell of his loneliness, replacing it with a fragile, terrifying hope. The fragile peace was shattered by a phone call from Maria. Her voice, usually so bright and melodic, was a thin, bitter wire. "Ali, are you euros happy?" Elias hesitated, choosing the safest possible answer. "Mom's getting better, Maria. The doctors say she's responding well." "I know that," she snapped, a steel edge to her voice he'd never heard before. "That's not what I asked. I saw the wedding photos. He's not some old man, Ali. He euros trade s beautiful. You lied to me. You stole my future." The accusation was a physical blow, validating his deepest insecurities. "Maria, I didn't lie," he said, his voice raw. "I didn't know who he was. I did this for Mom. You wouldn't have your euros, I would have," she shrieked, her voice rising with a frantic, desperate jealousy. "I would have done it for her. I would have found a way to love him. That life, that Marner euros, he was supposed to be mine, Illy, not yours. You were always so euros plain. You were never meant for a life like this." A cold part of him knew she was right. He wasn't meant for this world of sterile luxury. The call ended with a sharp click, leaving a ringing silence that was louder than her shouting. He had saved her from a fate she had dreaded, only to, in her eyes, rob her of a destiny she now coveted. The betrayal was a jagged wound. He didn't know that wound was about to fester. Seething with a jealousy that had curdled into malice, Maria did the unthinkable. She secretly reached out to Brianna Euros Trade's estranged family, the very people Brian had deliberately excluded from the wedding. Painting herself as a concerned relative, she fed them a carefully crafted story. She sent them photos, detailed Ilyarsa Euros Trade's humble background, and framed him as a manipulative schemer who had trapped their son for his money. She delivered the final, most damaging blow. She revealed that their mother was nothing more than a former housekeeper. She handed Brianna Euros Trade's enemies the exact ammunition they needed. Days later, Brianna Euros Trade's mother, a formidable alpha woman who wore her social standing like armor, stormed into his office. "What is the meaning of this, Brian?" she demanded, her voice a blade. "A marriage to a common Omega, the son of that woman." Brian remained perfectly calm, his expression a blank slate. "He is my husband, mother. He is a scandal, the son of a servant who worked in our home. Our business rivals are already whispering." She slammed a folder onto his desk. Euros the photos and letters Maria had sent. "This boy is a parasite." Brianna Euros Trade's gaze hardened as he picked up the folder. He recognized the elegant cursive on the letters. It was Maria's. A cold, silent fury, more terrifying than any outburst, filled the room. The sister hadn't just turned on her brother. She had used the woman who raised Brian, the only person he truly cherished, as a weapon to serve her own selfish desires. "Don't you ever," Brian said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that promised retribution, "speak ill of her, or of my husband. You have no idea what you're talking about." His mother recoiled, stunned by the icy command in his voice. The son she saw as a business asset had become a stranger, a king defending his territory. And as the storm broke in Brianna Euros Trade's office, Elias, miles away in the silent mansion, was about to feel the first tremors of the war his sister had just declared. "What do you guys think? Is Maria's jealousy understandable, or has she crossed a line she can never come back from?" Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you are Euros Trade as invested in Elias and Brian's story as I am, Dome Euros Trade T. Forget to hit that like button and subscribe for the next chapter.